Welcome! My name is Andreas Suika, and in this video I will show you different usages for Control Rig, which made a big leap in Engine. Control Rig is a node-based rigging system designed to provide riggers and animators with tools to create flexible, dynamic and procedural characters with an artist-friendly interface. I wanted to use Control Rig for gameplay prototypes to enhance the look and feel and feedback for the player, so I began to learn modeling, rigging and animating only a few months ago. I will show you how easy it is to create your first rig and animate an engine, how to change existing animations, and how to use Control Rig for real-time animation adjustments. We will take a look at procedural animation using the Control Rig component in Blueprint, including second dynamics like the wiggling tail that is done mathematically in Control Rig. So let's get started. I will show you how to enable Control Rig, walk you through the editor, and we will create a first rig. Then we go a bit further and look at a reverse food setup, which we will then use to create an animation sequencer. We will also check out the backward solve used to bake a rig onto an existing animation. I will show you a setup that does feet and hip adjustments in real time. This will include how Control Rig works in junction with other parts of the engine. We will dive deeper when checking out how to do procedural animations using Control Rig component for the flower and for the scorpion. At the end, we will look at some debug options and tips. All the content you will see in this video is done in Unreal Engine. Blender was used for modeling, creating the bone hierarchy and the weight paint. Big thanks goes to the Control Rig team, but especially Helge, Jeremiah and Greg, who were a great help for this project. Also high five to Tony, who helped me with his animation and rigging experience. Last but not least to my colleague Aaron, who helped me with environment. So let's start with our very first rig. To use Control Rig, you have to enable the plugin and restart the engine. Control Rig is still in beta, but it's not going away, but will be improved even further. We have, when we bring in a character, it generates two assets. One is a skeleton and one is a skeletal mesh here. So for this video and my own learning purposes, I did a very simple character like that. So he has only two legs, a body and some bones for an antenna. But you can do really complex characters here. Actually, it's used in Fortnite quite a lot and it was used in the Unreal Engine 5 demo. And then it generates also a skeletal mesh for us, which contains the vertices and material data, LODs, morph targets, etc. And that's what we use to generate as a Control Rig now. Right click and then here generate Control Rig, which makes a new asset. Let's open that up. So here we are now in the Control Rig editor. So on the left side, you can see here a viewport with our mesh, which is a preview mesh, which was automatically set for us, but we can change that later if we want. And then here is a hierarchy that got imported. That's important to notice. It's imported, not referenced. So if you change it, you have actually to update it here. And then in the middle here, we do the graph with all the logic, I'll show later. And then on the right side, we have details for the selected objects. Then you have on the bottom side all your variables in the My Blueprint tab. If this is not showing up for you, go to Windows and then My Blueprint and enable that and dock it somewhere. So let's start with something simple. So first we will use a forward solve event. Here are different events like a setup event, forward solve and the backward event, which we will use later for animation purposes. But for now we go with the forward solve. So let's drag that out and do something like draw hierarchy, which is a really handy node. Let's make this a bit bigger and showing us our bone orientation. So here I can see the x-axis, for example, is our main axis for the bones of this character I made. So really handy. So let's get rid of that. And now let's take a look. So we want to make a simple thing like I key for left, right leg and a control for the body. So let's get started. Let's search for some ikey. Here are some different ikey solvers, but we will go for basic ikey. And then we will use the left leg. And we will start with the upper leg. And we will go to the lower leg and then to the foot, which is the names I gave to the bones. And then you see an immediate problem. He is blopping to 0, 0, 0. That's the effector position, which is currently zeroed out. So we have to make that. And then he's losing his feet, but with propagate to children, we fix that. Now let's unplug that and make our first control for the effector. So right click and then you go to new and then you have different ones like bones, controls and space. For now we will work with controls mainly. So and that generates a control at 0, 0, 0. Let's name that like ikey left foot. Here it is. Currently it's just a ball. So let's outfit this. We can change the color here in the details panel, like a nice green. And then we also can give it a gizmo. There's actually under class, you have a gizmo library, which comes with the engine, but you can make your own. For now, we will start with a box. I personally like boxes because they show you all 3 angles of rotation. So it's really nice to debug and to start with. Let's bring that to a size that fits our character, like this. And now we have to move it into the right space, which is actually where the food is. So we could copy the data from the food to this control, or we can use a viewport and move it just in the vicinity of the bone. Do a right click, and then there is a set transform from closest bone. So now it snaps there and has the same transform, which is nice. So let's plug this back in. Here's our foot again, wrongly aligned. But now if we bring in our control and say get transform and plug this in, it's snapping at its place. And now you see we have our first I key moving, but the knee here is doing strange stuff. And that's because we don't have a pole vector yet. So, and what we want to do is we want to have a location instead of a direction here. So we could make a control for that, but I want to show you something pretty handy. So we can use this and add a vector and plug this in as a pole vector. And when we open this up, we can set up some events. Let's display where this position is, and that's where the debug, visual debug comes in handy. Let's make that bigger. So that now shows the position of this node in space. So let's move this a little bit out and a little bit up. So this is where our knee should now look at. And if we now use the control, you can see that looks much, much better. And it's doing actually what the normal knee of this character should do. So that's nice. But as an animator, I don't have any control of that. So instead of using this node, let's create a small control for that. So again, I do right click here, new control, rename it to something like PV_L. And then we have the little ball here. So let's move it to the position where we want our knee to point to. Let's find a nice spot like here. And then right click, and now we can use as current, which is nice. So now it is set up properly. Let's change the color as well. And then let's find a gizmo that fits. So maybe a pyramid will do fine. It's way too big. So let's get it to a proper size. So you can adjust this as you like. And then we can rotate it. So it's maybe pointing to the knee. And now with this setup, we can use get transform. We only need the location in this case, and we plug this in. And now we have the ability to do the I key for the foot, including manipulating where the knee is pointing at. Really nice and really easy and fast setup. So now as we have that, we also need this for the other side. So we could do the same process, but there's a mirror we can use. So we can mirror it over the x-axis, or say what we rename, so from _L to _R, and now we have it on the other side, which is already good. So we need the same now for the graph. So let's just take this and copy it over, connect it, and then we can select it, right click, and then we can rename the nodes. And as we have our naming convention used, this should go pretty fast and easy. So now it is aligned to that. So the only thing I have to change because of my bone orientation is the secondary axis. So my leg is rotated in the right direction for this. So now I have it ready. So now I can have both legs with I key and the pole vector done in just a few minutes. And that would be already nearly ready to animate. And now we are missing the body. So let's do a forward. And let's create a new control here. So again, we call this one body control. And then we do the same steps as before. So we move it in the vicinity of the bone, do right click, set in it from closest bone, change the gizmo. So maybe a hexagon is nice here. So let's rotate that and then bring it a little bit down in size. And here we are. So now we can make a set transform for this bone, and using the control get transform both in global space, and then plug this in. And now we can move his body around like this. So he's losing his legs. Propagate to children will fix that. So if we move him around, you can also see now that as we do the control for the body after the I key feels off. So we can change that. And here is why the order really matters. So let's unplug that and let's do the body control before we do the I key. So first we do that, and then after that we solve the I key for the food. And now you can see it fits and is what we were looking for. And we can move his body and his legs now. It's the first time this character comes to life. I really love this part. And with this basic setup, we can go now a bit further and add some features, and I show a reverse food setup. So I have here something prepared, and it's basically the same. So we have the body control and we have a basic I key for the feet. But in addition, he has some small enhancements. For example, his antenna has some second dynamics. So I will show how this is calculated. And then I made a control for changing his facial impressions, which is just a material. I will show how control rig communicates with that. And then we have the reverse food setup, which I have here with a control that is either distributing rotation to the heel or the toe. And I will show that. Actually, let's start with that. And here's the setup. So before we go deeper, I unplug the graph and show the hierarchy, which is extremely simple. So it starts at the heel, and then it goes to the toe, and then at the end of the chain there is the control we are using for the basic I key. Let's plug that in, and let's go to the other side where I hit all the controls that are not needed for the animator. So here I have this control. When we take a look at the node here, here it is, then you can see I'm using local space, and in this way I can figure out on which axis it's going in a positive or a negative rotation depending on its initial setup. And so with this, I can just say if it's negative or positive, I'm either distributing it to the toe or to the heel. And after that, we do the basic I key we have seen before, and then the ball correction. Let's unplug that. So here you can see without it, and then let's plug it back in. To do this, I use the project to parent node. It returns a transform of an object relative to another, like a parent constraint with maintain offset. In this case, from the toe to the ball and just the rotation. And that helps to fix that. And the last thing I'm doing here is just for convenience, having the control moving with the bone. If I don't do it, it looks like that. That doesn't feel very nice. So if I use the foot position after the solve, I can have the control going with it. So that's pretty nice and handy. So let's go to the antenna. For the antenna, up here, the antenna is a chain of bones from antenna 1 to 4. And I'm using a collection. A collection is a list of items, and you can easily create one by just drag it in and say create collection like I did here. And then for those, I'm taking those and iterating over them for each. And for each item, I'm setting the rotation, which I calculate, so I'll show you in a second, with a weight. And the weight is depending on the ratio, which is a number between 0 and 1 on the item chain here. So for the rotation, what I'm doing is I'm calculating from 2 vectors based on the body bone. And you can see here, when I move it left and right, I have the debug nodes with the visual debugging on for both of them. So let's show that. So it's for that and for that. So you see it also on the up here with the colors, so you can see how this is calculated. And then to have the blue one doing this springy kind of thing, I'm using a simulation node, a Verlet node with some settings I figured out works nice. So there are some nodes I want to bring you to your attention. One is the mask section with a lot of different things. Like there's noise, there's a lot stuff like curves, sinus curves, clamping, etc., etc. And then there's the simulation. So accumulates over time, delta from previous, and the Verlet I'm using here. It's worth investigating. They're really handy. So yeah, that's that. And then let's talk about the eyes. So I'm using a curve. So you can set a curve value. If I switch this off, and I'm going here to the curve container. Here you can see the mood curve. If you don't have that, you can go to Windows and then here curve container. And here's the mood. So the mood is a value stored in the skeleton. So I can add a curve here like that and set it either to material or morph target. In my case, it is influencing material, and it's influencing all the materials. And here is a eye material, and there's a parameter called mood. It's the same name. So this is how it's connected. And I'm using a flipbook here with 16 different faces. So if I change now the value here, it's going through the skeleton to the material. And now I can animate material with this. So I made a control for it. And this control is integer. You can see that here. I can have different control types. And I even limit it between 0 and 15. And then I do transform it to a float. And now I can switch his facial impressions with this control. Yeah, and with this setup, we can now talk about how to animate him in Engine. You can animate in any level, but I have a very simple one here. Let's grab our control and just drag it into the viewport. This opens up automatically sequencer and creates a level sequence for us. It also switches to the animation mode, in which we can find all our controls and some options like display the hierarchy or hide the manipulators. Very handy is only select rig controls, which prevents you from selecting anything else in the level, like in the background. Also worth noticing is you should switch off snapping for rotation and translation, otherwise animation is sometimes pretty hard or not even possible. So for this very small jump animation, I do like 24 frames only. And we do something like 80 frames or something like that. So I'm speeding up this process now. And here you can see how our controls are really handy. I figured out in this project, the more time I spend with our controls and make really nice and convenient controls, the easier this process is. As you might see here, I'm not an animator, and this is not a tutorial about sequencer, so bear with me while I make this a really fast jump animation very quick. So this is how it looks like, and I'm happy with it, but we could go now to the curve editor and tweak our curves. I don't want to go there now, but I want to show you the process. So now right click on the control rig, I can make an animation sequence from that. What really handy is create linked animation sequence. So let's do that. Let's name it like a only leg jump. So this creates a linked sequence. So the sequence and the animation is now linked together. Let's export that. And so here it is. And when we open this up, we have now an animation like if we have brought it in from any other external source. So this is nice. But let's take a look at the antenna here. The antenna is going a little bit crazy because it's not really done for this kind of fast movement. And as it is all now linked together, we can go to the control rig and, for example, unplug the simulation of the antenna. Let's save that. And then from the animation itself, as it is linked, we find open level sequence here, which brings us back to our scene. And here, if I play it now, you can see the antenna is already not moving anymore. I can save that, and then if we go back to the animation itself, you can see now this is also adjusted. But be aware, it is not working when you change dramatically things in the hierarchy, adding new controls or something like that. But for this kind of fix, this is really convenient. And before we talk about bringing that back in a real-time setup, let's talk about how to change existing animations using control rig. So to change an existing animation, we first have to prepare our rig. Let me first bring back our antenna here. And now we're using the backward solve to move our controls with the animation. So here's a very simple example of that. So we're setting the body control by taking the transform of the body itself and then setting the body control. And then the forward solve, this is executed again, so it will move it again. So this is a very straightforward part. When we take a look at the feet, we have to see which bone do we want to use. In my case, I'm using the position of the ball to move the foot main L, which is my control where all the other controls are living in. So again, the project to new parent is a really handy node. And then I'm setting the foot main here. So we do that for the left and right leg. And then we also do it for the curve. So we can read the curve value from the animation and then feed that into our control. So he will change his face and we can then would be able to change it. So in a level, we can open a new level sequence. Let's do, for example, a crouch. So I do a new sequence, I call it sequence underscore only leg crouch. So we use our walk animation and then we change that a bit. So here we are. And now I'm looking for my skeletal mesh, which is here, and drop it into the sequencer, opening up the animation panel and then add this animation here. So now let's move him up a bit and move this here. So we have the loop here. And now if I play that, I have the animation. And now we can bake a rig on it. We can use edit with F-key control rig, which would create controls for each bone. That's not what we want. Right now we want to bake our own rig, which we have prepared, which we will find here. So let's use that. And then we will use keys, find some tolerance and bake it on. So now I have the animation with the control rig on top of that. And you can see already something I made by purpose, something wrong in this animation, so we can fix that. So the feed is completely wrong in first frame. And to fix this, we just use our control we made, positioning it, and that's it. And it's fixed. So this would have been a process where we would have import and exported and using external tools, which is now really convenient. Let's go one step further and use this walk animation to do a crouch. And for that, I use my control of the body. And here is a curve of his Z movement up and down. So let's first make this, let's move this a little bit up so he's not stomping so much. And again, this is not about animation itself. I'm still learning, so bear with me. And we bring him a little bit down, so it looks like he's crouching, like this should maybe work. Let's play. Yeah, I'm fine with that. And now we do the same as we did before. We do right click here and do linked, bake to a linked animation. Name it A only leg crouch, export. And now we have a new animation, which we can use in Animation Blueprint, for example, and have a new state. So that's how animation changes works with control rig. Let's now talk about adjusting things in real time using control rig. Here's our character now with all the animations we made in Engine. He's using a third-person character template and has a control rig in real time running on top of it, which makes a feet placement and some hip adjustments. He can also look at a flower if you're getting close and changing his face. So let's take a look how he's done. The blueprint of him is really straightforward. As said, it's just using the template. So I just changed the character, nothing fancy in the graph, and added an animation blueprint. And the animation blueprint is also extremely straightforward. It has a state machine with just a blend space right now between idle and walk. And then there is a control rig node, which gets some information like speed, look at, or location, the look at location. And here is a graph for real time. So let's take a look at that. So here you can find now the values that are coming in. And here's a left foot trace, the right foot trace, and here's a hip correction and the logic for the look at. And at the end, we do the I key for the feet. Let's take a look how we do the trace. So for the trace, I'm using a bone. You can add bones the same way you add controls by just go hit new and then bone, and you can make own hierarchies. And this bone here is using the transform of the foot. So it has exactly the same position. And I'm using this position to do a sphere trace. And if it hits something, I'm using the hit normal with an aim math to figure out how to rotate the feet. So if something is hit, he's taking the location and the hit normal with the transform, accumulate lerp on the transform, and then I'm setting the control I'm later using for IK. And actually exactly the same for the right side. Let's take a look at the hip correction. So for the hip correction, I'm having the bones of foot and the feet, and I can compare the newly computed IK with the initial length of that chain. And depending on if the left side or the right side has an adjustment, here I'm adding a little bit of an offset because I modeled the character with straight legs, which was not really helpful. But here I can do some correction and finding a magic number that works. At the end, I do accumulate lerp again, so it doesn't plop. And then I'm setting the control transform, which I'm then using to adjust the body bone. Let's take a look at logic. So from the animation blueprint, I'm getting the position which I have to transform from world, so it works in this control rig space. And again, I'm using an aim mask, do a little bit of clamping so his head is not rotating 360 degree here. And then if he's looking at something, I'm doing accumulate lerp for quaternion and then setting a rotation of the bone directly. And if he's looking at something, I'm changing the curve so I can have different faces, and he can look surprised or concentrated or focused on the flower. And as a result, we have him here with his feet properly placed and his hip adjusted, still playing his idle animation. So this is a very good example about a mixture of existing linear animation and control rig running in real time really smoothly together. After this mixed version, let's now take a look how to do a 100% procedural animated one with control rig. Here I have the flower, and the character is not only looking at the flower, but the flower is also looking back. And this is done without any linear animation at all. So let's take a look how this is done. In Blueprint, this blueprint I'm having here contains a control rig component, which you add in the same way you add any other component. And then in the viewport here, I'm having my skeletal mesh, and in construction script, what I'm doing is mapping the skeletal mesh and the control rig together. And the control rig also, I set the class of my control rig asset here. That's all. What you maybe have to check out if your skeletal mesh and control rig are aligned, and you can do this by setting the relative orientation, but I don't need to do that in my case. But this is important. And then control rig comes with new events like the on prevert forward solve that feeds data into control rig before the rig is evaluated per tick. And then I'm using this if a player character is set here. I'm taking his location because he's moving all the time, and then I feed that into the rig itself. And on the overlap, the flower is telling the character where it is, but I'm also setting the look at and setting the player character, which I then use on this event to update the location. So let's take a look at the rig itself. And the control rig is also pretty simple. So let's look at the hierarchy, which is just a chain of bones here. And the animation of the leaves are done in material with world offset. And then we have the control, only one control, which we will use. So to get to the position where the control should move, we take the look at position we get from the blueprint, we convert it to world and use an aim math again to do the rotation. And what I'm also doing here is I'm using the scale, so I'm scaling him up a little bit while he's looking. And after I accumulate lerp, I set the look at control here. And now I'm doing an item chain. I start with stem 2 because it looked better than starting with 1. And then I'm using CCD key to with an effector here, with adjusting some numbers. And that gave me this nice result of the flower bending in the direction of the player. So as an end result, within a really, really short time, I have now a flower creepily looking back to the player. I didn't want to stop there, so I made this 6-leg scorpion robot who's completely procedurally animated with using control rig component and a control rig asset, and that to create this feet placement and the wiggling tail and all that. So let's take a look at that and start with the blueprint. So the blueprint is inherited from a character, and I added a control rig component like for the flower and the asset here. And then I map them as I have shown before. But here I had to be aware they are in sync. So the control rig and component have the same rotation. Right now, control rig is not working with the inherited skeletal mesh. So I created an own one, ignoring the one that is there. And when we take a look at the graph, I'm using the same event as before. I might set this up differently with my knowledge now. But here I have a list of controls I'm using for line trace. So I get the control transform here, doing the line trace, and then doing a little bit of math, comparing the current position of the feet with the new trace. And then depending if it's far away, I'm setting the controls for the feet here with location and rotation, like I did in the other example in control rig actually. So that's for here. And then let's go to the control rig itself. So here we are. So as said, mainly the feet are driving all the rest. So the feet placement, as you can see here, if I move them, his body is also moving accordingly and his hands are wiggling and stuff. So here we have the body rotation we're doing. Then we have the CCDI key I'm losing for 6 legs. Then we will talk about the tail setup in a second. And then we have something for the hands and something for the left hand, right hand, and my antenna setup, which is pretty similar to what you have seen already. Okay, but let's take a look at the important pieces here, which is the body first. So if I move this feet around, as you can see, there's also the body moving. And how is this done? I have 6 legs on the left side and the right side, and I'm taking the transforms of them and interpolating the location on both sides. And then I'm using an aim mask to figure out how to move over time the body space. So the control of the body is living in a space I'm manipulating. There are 6 legs and they have 2 knees. So I didn't want to have a big graph. So here's the setup I came up with. It is using CCDI key and again a collection of items. In this case, I'm starting with the bones that are attached directly to the body here and iterate over them. And then I get the children, and this is what I use as an item chain in CCDI key. And then here I have the list of controls which are in the same order as my bones, and so I can use the index and use this as an effector, the transform of that as an effector. So that's basically the whole setup for all 6 legs. Let's take a look now on the tail, because that's interesting. The tail has 2 solvers. The first one is a distributed rotation on an item chain. So if I do this, he's beautifully using that. And then I have in between a space. And this space is using a Verlet node, so to do the wiggling here. So if you take a look at the hierarchy, I have the space I'm moving around, and then in that space, I have another control. And this control is a factor of a basic fabric. So what I can do now is I can move him here, and then I can go back to this rotation one and do something like that. So here you can see how powerful control rig can be, especially with the order of execution. And as a result, I have a character that's extremely responsive to players' input. This is still not perfect, and there's a lot to do, and I would do some things now different after learning that, but this shows the potential of control rig in a real-time environment, and it was really fun and fast to iterate on. To wrap this up, I want to show you some debug tips I figured out during working on that. So first of all, what's really handy is you can use control rig to watch at instances in the level. So I changed the filter to the instance I'm there, and then tada, I can see him in his current pose in the gameplay situation, which is super handy. So if I take a look at the hip and we remove this execution node, you can see no hip adjustment, and that's the reason why I implemented it. So he tries to reach this point but can't. Let's plug that back in. And here you can, it's not only for debugging, but I can also find my magic numbers here. As I said, I modeled him in the wrong way, so I had to do some adjustments here. And that was really handy. Next one is the visual debugs nodes I used before already. So let's go to the lag. And when I can toggle it, I can edit them. I can keep them there as I made them, and then I can toggle them on and off depending on my needs. So here is the distance between the bones. Next one is some of the draw nodes. Here, draw line. I can enable them here, and then I can draw some lines which help me greatly to see what's going on in my rig and if it's behaving like I was expecting. You can also use those for enhancing the visuals of your rig. So I use this, for example, to visualize a little bit better which pole vector is attached to which knee, like that. And then there's one tip Tony gave me to have some debug controls lying around, which you attach to a situation, and depending on the execution order, it helps you to visualize what's going on in a certain moment in your rig like this. So that was really handy, and I used a lot. As with many parts of the engine, you can enhance control rig using editor blueprint widgets or even Python. Here's a link to the RP documentation, so you can optimize your workflows or work with even more complex control rigs. This project was a blast and I learned a lot. So thanks for watching, and we are looking forward for all your beautiful creations and animations made with control rig in Unreal Engine.